Hello, this is Dr. Fran again, and I'm going to go ahead and spend some time continuing and finishing up our series on the former prophets before we go on to the later prophets. This is really the book of, we went 1st and 2nd Samuel. We're going to do 1st and 2nd Kings, and along with that, 1st and 2nd Chronicles parallels a lot of this. We'll spend our time in 1st and 2nd Kings, and as we look at 1st and 2nd Kings, there's an outline here where you have a united kingdom, the first 11 chapters, and then it becomes a divided kingdom. And then it goes on to how we see Judah's kings eventually in exile of Judah to the Babylonians. Again, the themes are there. It's dangers of idolatry, how idolatry occurred and what happens to that, how God is gracious and merciful, but eventually becomes a judge, and yet he promised and fulfilled eventually that restoration of the people of God. So when we see 1st and 2nd Samuel, and we mentioned this already, that there's two kings, Saul and David. 1st and 2nd Kings is like 1st, 2nd Samuel on like 4 times speed. It's very fast forward moving through the different generations. It's also to Kings is like to Samuel, like Judges is to Joshua. In other words, Judges was a downward spiral of what happened in Joshua. Kings is the same way. 1st and 2nd Kings, it's a downward spiral. We saw what happened in Samuel with David and Bathsheba, and Kings just takes it, and it's like downward spiral on steroids here. Okay, so David chooses Solomon. Solomon's his successor, and in the middle of this, David dies, and Adonijah, David's other son, tried to become the next king, and David then dies, and then eventually Solomon kills Adonijah, and he is king. So he inherits the monarchy. He's northern kingdom and southern kingdom. In other words, it's one kingdom. It's a united kingdom. God said to him, you can ask anything you want. And what did Solomon ask for? He asked for wisdom. And so God gave him wisdom. And the irony is, in spite of this wisdom, he does some really stupid things. He sacrifices in high places, which is an analogy for sacrificing to a false god. He begins to marry women from other lands and other gods, other false gods, other cultures, and he gets led astray. So his wisdom is not really being applied in his own life. It's maybe applied to other people's lives, but not into his own life. He does get to build the temple, though. God chose him to do that, not David. And the temple is 30 feet wide, not very big, 90 feet long, and 45 feet high. And you say, wow, that's not very big. No, we have houses bigger than that, right? But pretty big houses, but big houses bigger than that. But it is tall. It's 45 feet high, and this is a major deal, though, for this to happen. Gold and bronze, ornaments that are so detailed. Cedar from Lebanon. There's some great, beautiful portions of Solomon's temple that just looks absolutely gorgeous at that time, that no one had ever seen before. So things are good. The temple's being built. God affirms a covenant. He fills the temple with his presence. Things are good. Bad days are behind. Things are looking good. But things do go south. I already mentioned King Solomon loved many foreign women, and the daughter of Pharaoh, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, Sidonians, the Hittite women, on and on and on. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and the key verse here in verse 3 is, and his wives turned away his heart. So we see this what happens is Solomon has got this turmoil, there's idolatry happening, and he dies in this time, and Rehoboam is now the new king, And Rehoboam is an idiot. He's stupid here. He's a younger king, and the elders come to him, the old men, verse 6, and they said to him, they said, hey, how do you want us to advise answers people? And they said, if you, and this is what Rehoboam said, how should I answer to people? The old men said, look, if you'll be a servant to the people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, they'll be your servants forever. Then he went from the old men to the young men who said, look, this is what you should say. Your father made our loaves heavy, okay? And he said, look, and lighten it for us. He said, you should say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And so if my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I'll add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, I'll discipline you with scorpions. Not the right thing to say, because there was a huge division in Israel because of that. And a guy named Jeroboam led the northern part of the kingdom to break away. So only Judah and Benjamin made up the southern kingdom. The rest of the tribes, the other 10 tribes, made up the northern part of the kingdom. So now the kingdom is divided as the northern kingdom, which is called Israel, the southern kingdom called Judah. And so Saul, after his death, we had a divided kingdom. So we see, take a look here, and you'll see that from Saul's reign, you had a 40-year reign. Then David's reign is about a 40-year reign. And then we see a 22-year reign a 40-year reign in Solomon. I don't know what I was thinking. 40-year reign in Solomon. And then right after Solomon happened, there's a divided kingdom. So Saul to David to Solomon, and then a divided kingdom, and they became two large kingdoms, one with 10 tribes, one with 2 tribes. And this is what it looks like. So you'll see that Judah's pretty big because it's the largest of the tribes, but it's still 2 distinct, different kingdoms. Jerusalem was in Judah, and so Israel began to set up their own places of worship at Shiloh and Shechem and Bethel and Jericho and Samaria. And so Jeroboam decides he's going to set up his own calves, and he's going to worship there. And so he sets up golden calves, believe it or not, just like in Exodus at Bethel. And they begin to make Bethel their worship site, their main worship site, to Jerusalem. And so Samaria, which is the capital of Israel, people worship at Bethel and not to the southern kingdom. And they don't worship God, they worship false gods, and they fall into idolatry pretty fast. From there, we see the divided kingdom. I'm not going to go through all these kings, but I want you to notice that in every case, you have these different kings, and with a few exceptions, almost all of them are evil. You've got, in Judah, you've got some good kings, and you've got some not so good kings, some evil kings. Probably the greatest of the kings is Josiah, down here to the bottom on the right side, of 639 BC to 609 BC, and he was faithful to God. But most of them were not faithful in both cases. It got worse and worse and worse as time progressed, from the 900s all the way down to, in Judah's case, 586 BC. So about 400 years, it just disintegrated. From this turbulent time, God raised some prophets, the rhyming prophets, if you want to call it. You had Elijah with a J and Elisha. Elijah was one who confronted Baal's prophets in Mount Carmel. Elisha was one who was Elijah's successor. He was his protege, and asked for a double portion of the Spirit and received him, and was protected by God throughout his time as a prophet. Eventually what happens is the northern Israel, the northern kingdom, Israel, falls at the hands of Assyria. Assyria takes it over, destroys them. But we continue to see in the southern kingdom, they decline. They see the warning. But eventually, even them, about 140 years later, they decline to the point where they fall and Jerusalem is burned, and they are taken captive to Babylon, to the north, farther north, and they're held there for 70 years. And they are a little small remnant remains of Judah, but for the most part, that is a destroyed country. And eventually, 70 years later, the exiles come back, a small portion of them, and they rebuild the temple and Jerusalem and the walls. So here's a key for both understanding First and 2 Kings. It was a spiral out of control. 24 times the phrase, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. 28 times they sacrificed at high places, which means, again, I told you that's an analogy to sacrificing to false gods. It was a story of unfaithfulness that eventually God had to say, I am going to destroy one kingdom and I am going to destroy the other and keep a remnant, because I made a promise to my servant David that his sons will always be on the throne. And that's eventually happened in the person of Christ, who was a direct lineage to David. More on that as we get to the later prophets. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I hope you're enjoying this. Let's talk some more in a little bit.